There's a pattern that was discovered in 2019. Saudi Arabian college students in trouble with the law in America fled the country before trial with the help of their own government. That they escaped with such help should not come as a big surprise, and by the way, if you're here for anti-Arab or anti-Muslim rhetoric or anything bad about the Saudi people, you should look elsewhere. What we will be discussing is what nobody else has thus far, the assistance that the Saudi government got from Americans employed in our courts, in law enforcement, in state agencies, and in private law firms. And we can't ignore homegrown public corruption any more than we can ignore the illegal actions of foreign officials. All of this misconduct is best shown through the tragic case of Fallon Smart, a 15-year-old Portland girl who was just trying to cross the street, but who ended up having a national foreign policy rule named after her. There's so much more to her story than you know.
Fallon was an awesome kid, the biggest heart, biggest blue eyes, biggest smile. She loved music. She's one of those people who like wear their hearts on their sleeves. So when they're excited, you can just see it in their face and it lights up the room. And when she's sad, everyone around her feels it and wants to lift her up. She was an artist. She wanted to be a school teacher. She wanted to help kids going through tough times in middle school and high school. She loved to sing. She was always sing-songy and humming a song.
On August 19th, 2016, Fallon Smart had just finished up her shopping and was looking for her mother's car, where her family was waiting. They were going to the movies. Her 16th birthday was in a few weeks. She just needed to get across Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard. Minutes earlier, Portland Community College student and Saudi national Abdulrahman Noura was hanging out with 3 Saudi friends. His license was suspended, but they piled into his beat-up '98 gold Lexus and headed out for burritos. They were soon driving west on Hawthorne on a half-mile stretch that had no traffic signals or stop signs. Fallon was at the other end. Fallon saw her mother, Fawn, waving to her in the distance. But then Fawn lost sight of Fallon. Fallon had been struck at the intersection of Hawthorne and 43rd and landed 100 feet away. An ER doctor who happened to be nearby administered CPR, but it was no use. The Lexus never stopped, but soon circled back. Noura identified himself to Portland police officers. He claimed Fallon jumped in front of his car, and he had tried to avoid her. He said he was not speeding. But witnesses described the Lexus as flying. None heard the brakes, and one said they heard the engine rev. Security footage showed the car barreling down the center turn-only lane. Police estimated it was going at least 55 miles per hour. Noura was brought in. Tests confirmed he was not under any influence, and he was apparently not using his phone while driving. He tried calling the Royal Consulate General of Saudi Arabia in Los Angeles, but their office was closed. He didn't seem to understand that he was being arrested and repeatedly asked when he could go home. Noura spent that night and the next 21 in custody, and maybe he would have remained there had it not been for Ginger Mooney. Ginger Mooney is an attorney based in Hood River, a whole county away from Portland, where she rarely appeared. In August 2016, the overwhelming majority of her clients were elsewhere. Further, criminal defense was not her primary practice. Post-conviction work was. That's the business of getting verdicts tossed after an appeal has failed. Mooney had a state contract for that work. However, Oregon's unusual public defense system allowed her to accept paying clients as well. Like Noura. But she just appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, to handle the kind of case she usually didn't. And right out of the gate, Mooney filed unusual stuff, and confusing and irregular things happened. Let's go slowly through those early days of the court case, because it really was a tangled mess. At her first appearance, Mooney filed an odd letter of representation which implied that another attorney was trying to appear on Noura's behalf. If so, there is no longer any record of them in the case file. Bail was initially set at around $250,000, but it was quadrupled at Noura's first arraignment, at the DA's urging. The DA didn't want him released, period. For 2 weeks, Mooney negotiated the conditions of Noura's release from custody. On September 6th, Mooney received a check for bail from the Saudi Royal Consulate. In Oregon, a defendant only has to pay 10% of bail as a surety or security deposit, and it is held by the court. The next day, September 7th, the criminal charges were boosted to manslaughter in the first degree. Despite the amplified charges, Judge Edward Jones strangely reduced bail back down to $280,000, and an arraignment that was scheduled for September 9th was mysteriously canceled. Then everything went sideways. On the morning of September 8th, Noura was arraigned at a hearing that had been hastily scheduled just hours earlier, before the court was even open. Audio from that hearing reveals that Mooney claimed she never received notice of the new schedule and was there only because she happened to be in the courthouse on other business and happened to pass by.
I didn't get notification that the date had changed today.
Timing is everything. You're on time.
Yep, I was just checking out the window.
Judge John Whitmire was curiously unconcerned that Mooney had not been notified that her limited English-speaking client was being arraigned and was there only by chance. He was also unbothered that no one from the DA's office was there, not to mention the victim's family. Mooney then snuck from the secret arraignment to the bail office and tried to get her client out of custody with no requirements of release, without having to forfeit his passport, and without any monitoring in place. It was only because the bail office refused to accept Mooney's $100,000 check for the reduced $28,000 bail that her plan failed, and she was forced to call the DA and others. Mooney herself provided the best summary of her conduct at a hearing later that day in front of a different judge.
I was randomly over at GSC 3 today. I find out that the arraignment has been canceled for tomorrow, where all three of us were scheduled to appear. And at that exact moment, my client was there being arraigned. I happened to walk into court and he's arraigned.
What? Okay. That's another.
And then I went down to pay his bail at the amount that Judge Albright said. Mm-hmm. They won't accept the check because the bail's been reduced back down to the original amount, back down to $28,000. So, and there's no conditions of release. Well, because it was on the indictment.
And nobody was heard.
Right.
The judge sounds incredulous, and we should be also. Stuff like that simply does not happen in Portland. Because her story stretches all credibility, I checked Mooney's historic court schedules, and she had no other official business there that day, or that week for that matter. And that she just happened to walk by the correct courtroom while carrying a $100,000 check the day after bail was lowered to $28,000? Well, it sure seems like Mooney knew in advance about the last-minute arraignment and was there exclusively to quietly bail Noura out of jail without the imposition of any pesky measures necessary to ensure that he remained in the United States. It doesn't matter that it didn't work. She tried it. And it sure does appear that someone at the court gave her a hand.
How can you have a hearing without the DA? That, by Ginger Mooney's own words, she just happened to be in the courtroom, like if that's not and even the judge in that hearing said, wow, that's so lucky you just happened to be here. Like, come on, like that's not how any of this works,
The situation was forced back onto its rails the next day when Judge Cheryl Albright raised bail back to $1 million and imposed terms of release that had been hammered out between all the parties, including the family. One term that Mooney specifically requested was a waiver of extradition, purely for show, because Saudi Arabia does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. Now, about that $100,000 check. It was not made out to the sheriff's office or the court, but to Noura himself. It was deposited into his inmate account, and he was then allowed to claim that he had paid bail. So on September 9th, his 21st birthday, Nura was released. He surrendered his passport to immigration and was fitted with an ankle monitor. Not much happened for the next several months. There were a few settlement conferences, including in spring 2017, but by then a trial appeared imminent. And then Mooney moved to suppress most of the state's evidence against Nura, including his own confession. Mooney argued that Nura had not been read his Miranda rights, had no translator during questioning, and didn't really understand what was happening. That is, she asserted that he had not validly waived his rights before he confessed. Because of that, we took a closer look at the police investigation and found some stuff. Page after page of the police report showed that not one of the 18 witnesses saw the driver of the Lexus that hit Fallon and sped off. However, 5 of them did describe the person who got out of the driver's seat after the car circled around and returned to the crime scene. 4 of those 5 described Nura as the driver, but one person described Nura as getting out of the passenger side, and a man with short hair getting out of the driver's seat. Nura had a dramatically different hairstyle than his passengers, so there's no mistaking him for anyone else, and there was no clear image of the driver in the security footage of the car before or after the crash. Given that Mooney was trying to get his confession tossed, it's reasonable to ask, was Nura even the real driver? The car's other occupants were Mohammed Baksmati, Sultan bin Jadid, and Abdulaziz bin Jadid, who was a minor at the time. Sultan claimed he was asleep during the short drive for food, which is barely plausible. But if he and Nura were both actually seated on the driver's side, it would have been easy for them to switch places in the amount of time that the car was out of view of security cameras. I got body cam footage released through a public records lawsuit I filed and won. It appears police also had concerns that Nura was not the real driver and pressed Sultan on that point.
I want you to be very honest on this question, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So, who was driving the car?
Abdulrahman.
Abdul?
Yeah.
Is that the black guy with the
Yeah.
dreadlocks?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're 100% sure?
Yeah.
Okay. You wouldn't lie to me?
No.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk to your cousin and I forgot the driver's name.
Abdulrahman. Driver? Abdulrahman. Yeah.
Abdulman?
Abdulrahman. Yeah.
Okay. And that's his first name?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to do the same thing, talk to him, and see about looking at his cell phone, okay?
Okay.
They tried to shake Muhammad's story as well, but he had blood on his clothes that was consistent with the point of impact on the front right of the car.
So there's no reason you were driving, right?
No reason I'm talking about.
Right. It was Abdul that was driving? Not you?
That's me.
Okay. If we find out otherwise?
Okay.
Okay.
I swear.
Okay. I just want to make sure. All right. So I'm going to have... Now, your cousin there, he doesn't speak too good English? He doesn't speak English?
Who? Abdulaziz.
Abrizaz?
It's more a little bit.
More a little bit. Okay. All right.
Police were told that young Abdulaziz could not speak English, so he apparently was not questioned at all. Despite winning a judgment in my records suit against Portland, I never did get any video of their interrogation of Nura on the scene or at the police precinct. Regardless, it's unconscionable that no interpreter was ever brought in to this major crime scene for these important interviews. They clearly did not understand the papers they were signing or what their rights were. And what would due process even mean to kids from Saudi Arabia? Even if their English was good enough to attend college in America, would they even understand their right to remain silent?
Yeah, I mean, I assumed that there was footage of him. I assumed that there were witnesses that saw him driving. And then the fact that there are witnesses that didn't describe Mr. Noura as the driver, that said, they didn't see the long dreadlocked hair, that there wasn't a clear idea. It just, to me, it just brought into question is like, well, what kind of investigation did they even do? Did they just go off of his word because he said, I'm the driver? They're like, okay, you're the driver.
Yeah.
Which like we've discussed, like that people in drunk driving cases switch seats all the time. People who's driving a rental car that's not in their name, they switch seats in an accident all the time. It seemed like there really wasn't much investigation being done. They just went by Mr. Noura's word, the guy who just killed someone in a hit and run accident and ran and then came back. In my mind, yeah, that you should maybe do a little more investigation than just going off of what he says. Like, people plead guilty to crimes they don't commit all the time. I would think that there would be more stringent investigation. And yeah, it blew my mind to see that wasn't the case.
It's not uncommon for a passenger to take the blame for an impaired driver or a driver who has a record or somehow has more to lose. But for Saudis, there may have been other factors at work. Noura came from a middle-class family. Was the actual driver a member of a higher class? Could there have been pressure to switch seats? Or did Noura let the 16-year-old kid try driving his car? Either way, Mooney's plan was to suppress Noura's confession and get an acquittal, because there was no other evidence against him, other than the fact that it was his car that ran Fallon down. But you can't jail Alexis. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Noura did not realize that Fallon had died when he stepped forward and confessed to being the driver. We also know that his mental health deteriorated as the prospect of a criminal conviction became more real. But what nobody knew at the time, as the court date quickly approached, was that Ginger Mooney had 4 previous Saudi clients escape the country before trial or while on probation, and that there were problems with bail and passports in those cases too. And that's not just an abysmal track record. It's what we call a pattern.